They're trying to come up with the thing Obama wanted, which is Russia. They were involved. They wanted to help Trump. That's why she lost. And suddenly the Steele dossier, which had already been out there, this is one of Andy's points that he thinks undermines Tulsi, how the Steele dossier became super important, because what Andy says is they didn't say Russia was extra involved just because Obama told them to. They had already relied on the Steele dossier in the fall of 2016 to get the ability to spy on Carter Page, where they went into the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court and they used the Steele dossier to get a warrant to spy on Carter Page. So his point is they were already focused on Russian interference and they used the Steele dossier in the fall of 2016. But you're making the point that at this point in the timeline, the Steele dossier became extremely important. Why?
Well, with all due respect to Andy, for whom I have a lot of respect, I think that actually is kind of an apples to oranges comparison, because the September 2016 issue with the FISA warrant application, that was, I would say, more of an internal mishap within the FBI. This is part of the Crossfire Hurricane investigation into Trump and Russia, and they were attempting to find someone they could get FISA surveillance authority on. The initial target was George Papadopoulos, but they threw him out in August of 2016 as not having any credible links to Russia. So they settled on Carter Page, and in order to get surveillance authority on Page, they had to use the Steele dossier because there was no other credible intelligence. In fact, he was an informant, or he was in good standing with the CIA at the time, which they kept out of that warrant application. So that was just the use of the Steele dossier earlier in 2016. That was sort of a self-contained little thing that happened within the FBI. What happens in December of 2016 is a much bigger and more important embrace of the Steele dossier. This is when the entire intelligence community throws its weight behind this document, which, by the way, had been poo-pooed previously by the CIA as being internet rumor, and the other agencies didn't think of it in terribly high regard either, until this moment when it became important. So I think that's important, and it's also important to note that this was why the press was suddenly able to write about this, because everybody had the Steele dossier, Megyn, you know this, in September and October of 2016, but nobody published it for the very good reason they couldn't confirm it. It wasn't until the Obama administration threw their weight behind it that they could report it.
They had the permission slip. So now they need the Steele dossier because the boss has told them to get back to him with an assessment that says Russia did interfere and Russia meant to help Trump. And so where do they turn? They don't have it, except in the Steele dossier, which we now know was totally made up. It's been entirely discredited. That was the best evidence they had, which you're reporting to, even at the time, they knew was bullshit, but they decided to go with it anyway. So now they start to lean on that. And now we get to the press. This is so interesting. So you write, at Racket, it's suspicious that a presidential daily briefing was postponed to make way for an intelligence community assessment ordered at Obama's request. It's fishier yet that the evidence that Putin intended to help Trump came from a classified annex. It didn't make its way into the principal report because the main intelligence agents objected too much to that. So they stuck it in an annex to the intelligence community assessment. So anyway, fishier yet that the evidence Putin intended to help Trump came from a classified annex containing Steele dossier material. And here we go. But the smoking gun is that these eventual conclusions leaked instantly, not 1 or 2 weeks after Obama ordered the intelligence community assessment, but the same day before any group work could possibly have been done. And this is you writing on December 9th, 2016. The New York Times ran with the headline, quote, Russian hackers acted to aid Trump in election, U.S. says. The exact thing it appears Obama wanted and they didn't have, and the lower level intelligence agents were saying, we can't include that. That cannot be a key judgment, but got overruled by Brennan. The New York Times has it the next day. It was just the previous day that Comey was like, I'm out, I'm not doing that. And that Brennan or Clapper put a hold on that planned presidential daily brief within 24 hours. The New York Times headline is exactly what Obama wanted. Russian hackers acted to aid Trump in election, U.S. says. And you say the piece not only led with a full-blown Steele dossier, saying that Putin acted to help Trump at Hillary Clinton's expense, but it followed with aggressive conclusions about Russian hacks of both Democratic and Republican Party infrastructure. Also, that same day, the Washington Post ran a piece describing a secret assessment that Russia worked to help Trump, even though the group assessment had only just been assigned. Washington Post reporter Greg Miller went on air with PBS to flog the paper's secret assessment story and spoke of Russians having weaponized material. And not for nothing, Matt, but you point out all these reporters would go on to win Pulitzer Prizes for their reporting.
I mean, it's kind of amazing. I look back at this, Megyn. At the time, I was a Democrat. I had voted for Hillary Clinton in that election cycle. I wasn't particularly a fan of Donald Trump, but all of this material about Trump and Russia, as soon as it came out, my instantaneous reaction was, this doesn't feel right. I remember putting out a column, said something about this stinks, and it was sourced in the same way that the WMD story was sourced, with lots of unnamed officials referring to things that could not be independently verified by other reporters, which is always a big red flag with this serious of a charge. But everybody piled on. And I had never seen anything like it in media before. Even the WMD story, it took some time for there to be consensus formed. Here, it happened overnight. Everybody jumped on the bandwagon, and it was crazy.
And we know why. We know why, because at least with WMD, they realized printing that shit was going to get us into a war, and there should be some hesitancy before doing it. But this, the only stakes involved were you would unfairly condemn Donald Trump and maybe not undermine his presidency, which is meaningless to the Washington Post and the New York Times and CNN, which was just as guilty. Those three were the worst. Politico too. Those four, the absolute worst. And now we can see completely doing stenography for this dishonest intelligence community.
Yeah. And again, I think most journalists of the old school, if you interviewed reporters from the 70s and 80s, like the frontline investigative reporter types who would have done that kind of story back then, they were always motivated primarily by the fear of getting something big wrong, right? And this is exactly the kind of story that would worry a good reporter a lot, because you're not able to see the thing at the middle of this big, presentation, or what's inside the sort of Christmas wrapping in your story. You just can't see the evidence, and yet you're going to make this enormous conclusion on the front page of your newspaper. And if that turns out to be wrong, once upon a time, that was your career. You were never going to work again. But we're in a different world. Now you can make those kinds of mistakes and get promoted afterward.
And get Pulitzer Prizes. So here's the next piece of it. So you write, from there, officials built the Trump-Russia narrative brick by brick. You write, on December 15th, the NSA's Admiral Michael Rogers, who in private refused to upgrade his agency, the NSA's confidence level from moderate to high on this nonsense, gave an interview to the New York Times in which he said there should be no doubt this was a conscious effort by a nation state to attempt to achieve a specific effect. News that the FBI agreed ran the next day. This is exactly like COVID, and how Fauci and Collins got all those virologists who had been saying, it looks like it came from a lab, after a browbeating within 24 hours to completely reverse themselves. And then they were saying it was racist to say it came from a lab. Okay, same thing, but like very dangerous. Okay, and you say this is the process that led to the release of the much discussed January 16th, 2017 intelligence community assessment that concluded Vladimir Putin and the Russian government aspired to help President-elect Trump's election chances when possible by discrediting Secretary Clinton. The very report that magically Washington Post and New York Times knew how it was going to come out before it had even been drafted or before they'd even started working on it. And this dovetails, because you say it started brick by brick, the whole narrative about Russiagate and the intel community using these media outlets as their stenographers. And it just happens to track with a clip that went viral this week in the wake of the Colbert cancellation, which shows actress Claire Danes, who of course starred in that great Homeland series on Showtime. And she talked about how she, in that role, playing a spy, was meeting with spies on the regular during this time frame. It was 2018 under Trump. And as soon as she starts to talk about how cozy the intel community was getting with reporters, Colbert, who is not dumb, though he's a hack, stepped all over her and tried to change the subject. Here's the clip.
So now one of the things that you do you do this every season where you go get to spend some time with some actual spies?
We do. It's like the coolest part of my job. Spy camp for us producers and writers. And
really?
Yeah.
Is it like, you know?
So we park ourselves in a club in Georgetown and talk to like real spooks. And, you know, people in the intelligence community and the State Department and journalists and people who really...
What do they tell you that, like, what's the most surprising thing that they've told you about their jobs or something you wouldn't even know?
Well, every year it's different,
You did not want to hear that.
For a while, and the climate has changed. But this year it was all about, you know, the distrust between the administration and the intelligence world, and the intelligence community was suddenly kind of allying itself with journalists, which usually they're not.
How long ago did you start shooting this season? How long ago?
We started in late August, September.
No, didn't happen. Didn't hear it. How long have you been shooting the season?
It's unbelievable, that clip. I mean, I've been on Steven's show. I liked him, you know, but that's very embarrassing. And yeah, all these journalists, they were in bed with these spooks at this time, and they were essentially just printing wholesale these conclusions that they were fed. I mean, just think about it. That story that came out in the New York Times on December 10th or whatever it is about Russia interfering to help Trump, or Putin interfering to help Trump. Think about how quickly they had to put that together. You know, that unless that was somehow in the works with CIA sources early, like from much earlier on, that's doing a story on that scale in 24 hours is just incredible.
You have not checked what you've been told. You have just been a stenographer. That's what that shows. And now Trump is very interested in this story, understandably, since his entire first term was undermined by this fake narrative. And now for the first time, we're really learning that it really was directed by Barack Obama. I mean, that's what the Tulsi reveal on Friday night shows. Since President Trump was sworn in, his administration has made enormous progress at a breakneck pace. But don't forget, while they're moving mountains for the good of the nation, you've got your own personal savings to worry about. And one of the best ways to look after your savings is through diversification, particularly with gold, like from Birch Gold Group. In the past 12 months, the value of gold has increased by 40%. OMG. Central banks continue to bolster demand for gold by buying in record quantities. Global instability and tension is high, and Birch Gold makes owning physical gold extremely easy. Easily convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold, or buy some to store in your home safe. Just text MK to the number 989898 and Birch Gold will send you a free info kit on gold. There's no obligation, just useful information. With an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau and tens of thousands of happy customers, take control of your savings today. Text MK to the number 989898. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.